Yes, the Honourable.
Any questions be allowed to stand.
Agreed. Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I begin, I'd like to share that I'll be splitting my time. I'm glad to have the chance to rise to share more about why Greens cannot support this amendment, but will continue to support C-59, the Fall Economic Statement, despite its imperfections. Now, let's be clear. This amendment says essentially let's not move forward with C-59 at all in its entirety, and instead, let's just repeal the carbon tax under the guise that this is going to help people across the country dealing with issues with respect to the unaffordability of day-to-day life. Well, we can't support the amendment because repealing the carbon tax won't do the vast majority of Canadians who are having a difficult time with the cost of living any good. There's a reason why. All the talk of food banks in this place, if any parliamentarian were to take a look at what food banks are actually calling for example, what is the Daily Bread Food Bank calling for in their pre-budget submission? They actually have 3 recommendations. All 3 of them call for increasing and moving quickly to put in place the Canada Disability Benefit, to provide support to people with disabilities who are disproportionately living in poverty across the country. 40% of people living in poverty across the country are people with disabilities, and groups like the Daily Bread Food Bank have been joining in solidarity with the disability community to call on this government to move quicker to put in place a Canada Disability Benefit that would bring people with disabilities above the poverty line. No mention of that in this motion that would just get rid of everything else that's in the Fall Economic Statement. But not only that, repealing the carbon tax would mean removing the rebates that go with it, which leave lower income Canadians in my community better off. It is true. The carbon tax went up 2 cents a litre last year, and rebates went up along with it. Now, the profits, pure profits, of the oil and gas industry in the same period of time, they went up 18 cents a litre. No rebates for any Canadians on that gouging. That's not just the total profits, that's only the increase. They went up from around 26 cents a litre to around 42 cents a litre or so. Pure profits of the oil and gas industry gouging Canadians, leading to their, I'll get the number to be specific, $38 billion a year in profits from the 5 largest oil and gas companies operating in Canada in 2022 alone. That's after share repurchases and dividends are all issued. It's why folks like myself and others have been calling to put in place a windfall profit tax on these excess profits of the oil and gas industry, the way many other jurisdictions already have all around the world. In fact, this government put in place a windfall profit tax on another sector already. In the midst of the pandemic, banks and life insurance companies had an extra 15% tax on profits over $1 billion. It's been done before in this country. We could do the same when it comes to the oil and gas industry. And if we did, we could use those dollars to invest in real solutions to help address the unaffordability of day-to-day life for Canadians who need it the most. For example, by increasing service and reducing fares for public transit across the country. For example, by making it cheaper and providing more incentives for Canadians who want to retrofit their homes. These are the kinds of measures that would actually help address affordability. Repealing the carbon tax won't do anything to help Canadians who are struggling with day-to-day life. Now, on the subject of the Fall Economic Statement itself, while it is imperfect, Greens have been supporting it because there are many measures included that will help folks in my community and others across the country. The first I'd like to share with you about, Madam Speaker, is when it comes to making psychotherapy and counseling services more affordable. There was a long-held promise and commitment that was committed to and followed through on in C-59 to remove GST and HST from those services. A small measure that will make it more affordable for more Canadians across the country to have access to mental health services. I would expect all parliamentarians would likely agree in this place that we need to do more to make mental health services more available. Admittedly, this government actually committed $4.5 billion in the last election campaign for mental health transfer. They haven't followed through on that, but they did put in place this measure to remove GST, HST from psychotherapy services. It's an important, good measure that as Greens, we want to see made available to Canadians as soon as possible. There are also really important tax credits that will help bring along support for renewable energy across the country. There are tax credits that will benefit companies in my community like VCT Group that are designing and building the future of solar energy. And in fact, in conversations with VCT Group and their executives over the last year, they've shared with me directly how contracts that they would like to see move ahead are being held back because these tax credits aren't yet in place. And prospective customers of theirs don't have the business case to move ahead unless they see these tax credits in place. Even with the tax credits, the payback period for certain projects are still particularly long, but there are far more potential customers of theirs that would be open to moving ahead should we see C-59 and the clean manufacturing tax credit included in it move ahead also. It's one of the reasons why Greens have been so keen to finally get to the end of the day when it comes to getting C-59 passed. Again, this is the fall economic statement. We're in the late spring months now and have yet to see it move through. We're keen to see measures like this moved ahead with. In fact, it was at committee that Greens tried to even improve on this to have that tax credit. As it stands right now, these tax credits are only available not only if the manufacturing happens in Canada, but the use of the equipment has to be exclusively in Canada also. As Greens, we attempted to amend the bill at committee to allow for solar-powered lawnmowers, for example. A company called Swap Robotics in my community manufactures those. However, they're only used in Canada half the year. They're used in Florida half the year. And because they're used outside of Canada half the year, companies like Swap Robotics won't be eligible for that tax credit. As Greens, we would have liked to seen that expanded further. We weren't successful with that at committee. What is in the fall economic statement is still an important and good measure. We're still going to support it. I'd like to close, though, with the one piece of C-59 that we're most concerned with, and that is another fossil fuel subsidy. It is a massive tax credit for a climate false solution called carbon capture and storage. The tax credits that are in C-59 and have been rolled out for the last 3 years amount to $5.7 billion. All of which could be redirected to, for example, actually funding the Canada Disability Benefit, could be redirected to building public transit infrastructure, instead being wasted on this false solution, technology that more often than not around the world emits more carbon than it captures. I'll read you a quote in closing here from Environmental Defense back in 2021. These are the words of Julia Levin warning this government not to create the tax credits they did create, including in C-59. Her words, quote, "Carbon capture is being used as a Trojan horse by oil and gas executives to continue and even expand fossil fuel production. It's a dangerous distraction driven by the same polluters who created the climate emergency. The Government of Canada should not use any kind of financial support or tax incentive to prop up false climate solutions that only serve to delay the necessary transition off of fossil fuels." I could not agree more with Ms. Levin. Climate scientists around the world have been warning us to get our dollars focused on the most efficient use of funds. It's certainly not the case with this subsidy to carbon capture and storage. However, on balance, C-59 has measures that we need to see move ahead, and Greens will be supporting it. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The member made reference to it at the end that there are many benefits within the legislation, and those benefits will help Canadians. Yet we have seen, through the discussions, the debates, whether it's second reading or now third reading, committee stage, third reading alone, we're actually debating an amendment to third reading. Yet there's no reason why we shouldn't have been able to get this bill passed long ago, because it's denying the benefits and the supports that would be there until the legislation passes. And I'm just wondering if he could provide his thoughts in the fact that we're actually debating an amendment in third reading to the legislation, again, meant to postpone its ultimate passage. And it's the fall economic statement.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the Parliamentary Secretary knows, this amendment in front of us, it's of course not a substantive amendment. It's one of the tactics that is available to parties in this place to delay legislation in this case. But I also point out that it is the governing side that has the legislative power and calendar to set the agenda of this House. And so as Greens, our view is we would have liked to seen the fall economic statement move along more quickly and earlier. We can empathize with the fact that there are various delay tactics being put in place to slow the legislation down, but we also would encourage the governing side to ensure that when they have the legislative calendar available to them, that they do what they can to move ahead important pieces of legislation, this, of course, being one of them. It certainly is a bit odd that we're this late into the spring and still talking about the fall economic statement. Our interest would be for parties to come together, to come to agreement on legislation that could move ahead and ensure that that happens.
L'Honourable député de Longueuil.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. I very much enjoy working with him, so thank you to him and his work. He said a number of things, and I agree on some of them. With regards to carbon capture, it's not a way to fight climate change. Canada has a very heavy record. There was a carbon brief study that came out that says that Canada is the worst polluter in the world per capita since 1850, which is significant, and the Liberals keep investing. The IMF states that 38 billion US dollars were directly invested in helping the oil industry. I'd like to hear what my colleague has to say. Carbon capturing is bad. We need to divest from oil. Carbon tax is an interesting measure, amongst others. What other measures could be implemented by a Green Party one day? The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre. First of all, I'd like to thank my colleague for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert for his question. We agree with the Bloc Québécois, first of all, that we need to divest all government subsidies in oil, and that includes for carbon capture. As a Green government, what we will do is be far more ambitious and go much more quickly, with much more alacrity, forwards headlong against a climate crisis through investments, significant investments, in fact, in transit. We need to electrify our grid throughout the country, and we have to eliminate all subsidies for oil and gas.
For Edmonton West.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from Kitchener Centre for his measured comments today, and I have to believe that he's sincere when he talks about the false climate solutions, and I would have to mostly agree with them. But there is an issue I have to bring up. Like the Auditor General has, through her office, has the Commissioner of the Environment, and one of his most recent reports commented about $7.4 billion government money was spent on the net zero accelerator initiative. So $7.4 billion with no oversight, no due diligence before the money was given out, and no ability to track if any carbon emissions were reduced with his spending. So if he is sincere about his belief in ending or about the false climate solutions, will he commit to voting against future initiatives like this instead of voting for as he has in the past?
To give a very short few seconds to the Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre to answer. Very brief.
Yes, I can start by saying I appreciate the member for Edmonton West for bringing up something that we agree on, which is how poorly rolled out the Net Zero Accelerator Fund is. I raised that committee. What is a qualitative GHG reduction? Doesn't make any sense at all. Those $7 billion could have gone towards true climate solutions. It's disappointing that they haven't.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith will have